Today, my guest was a former councillor for the city of Waterloo. She represented the Uptown Ward from 2018 to 2022. She may not have been a councillor for a long time, but she certainly went through some interesting times. I'm pleased to welcome Tenille Bonoguore to the Old Grey Mayors podcast. Tenille, hello.
Hello.
Listen, thank you very much for being on here.
That's great. Happy to chat.
Yeah. And you know what? So far, I have this string of, I'm just interviewing for some reason, just the female politicians from Waterloo. So
that's because there's a lot of us.
I know, which is good. Yes, it's nice. I mean, as a father of three daughters, I know you have two daughters. Girls rule the world, so that's no problem. That's good. So, yeah. Tenille, I want to talk to you about first of all, starting about your early days of community involvement and how you got into deciding to run in the campaign, and then looking at a few things during your time. And, you know, we definitely have to make sure we speak about the pandemic and the impact that had. I know for you, you only had 1 year in as a politician when you got slammed with that, but you know, I think it'd be good to just get some perspective from you on what that was like dealing with that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in terms of, you know, where you're from and your career, that sort of thing.
Sure thing. So if you're trying to pick the accent, I am Australian and I'm a journalist by background. I worked in newspapers, in daily news in Australia, and then came to Canada for what I anticipated would be a 1 year working holiday. And I ended up getting a great job at the Globe and Mail, the national daily paper. They sponsored me to stay in Canada. So I was already starting to turn more long-term, looking at Canada. And then I met a fella, and it becomes a very typical immigrant story.
Boy meets girl.
We fell in love, yada, yada, yada. And he's a Kitchener boy.
Yes.
So we moved to Waterloo largely to be closer to his sons, my stepsons.
Yes. We're talking about Anthony Reinhardt. So, yeah, because so Anthony and I, we didn't really cross paths in high school. I'm a few years older than him, but we went the same route at St. Jerome's, and I always used to watch for any articles that he had written at the Globe and Mail, because of the St. Jerome's heritage, it was always good to see how well he was doing and how well he wrote. So I'm sure he wrote you a lot of beautiful love letters.
Actually, you know what? He did.
Oh, that was just, I just threw that one out there. But okay.
So yeah, we worked as colleagues for a while,
nice.
And then it was very professional. And then one evening at the pub, we just happened to sit next to each other, and just things sparked from there.
Oh, really? Wow, that's a theme in my life. I came late for a class one day, and my current wife, future wife, came in late and sat beside me. So that was sort of how we met as well.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I love the in person, the meet. You know, I don't know how much that happens anymore for youngins.
Oh, right. Now it's virtual. So
we moved to town, but then I left. I decided to move away from daily journalism when we came to Waterloo. Back then, like, this was 2010. So remote work really wasn't on the radar much. To work at the Globe, you essentially had to be in Toronto or in one of their bureaus.
Right.
And Waterloo was not far enough away to be a bureau. So I made a decided move into science writing. So I went into environmental science writing and editing, joined some sustainability groups and panels. And because I think what people don't realize is, often as a working journalist, you tend to keep yourself at a remove from your community. Right. Because you are the person who's reporting on that community.
Right.
When I moved to Waterloo, it was my first chance to really jump into the community as a participant, as opposed to an observer. Right. And one could say I got a little carried away.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But I just want to check, when you were at the Globe, what was your beat or areas that you covered when you were there?
I did a bit of everything, to be honest. So I was national news, general news, did some features, worked for the Globe TO section, which was specifically about Toronto. But I also spent a lot of time on the website globeandmail.com. Now, back in those days, before 2010, the website essentially had its own news team. So there was the web news team and then the newspaper news team.
Oh, okay. So all right.
I was less than 6 months into living in Canada, and I was the person on the website writing the first version of Canadian news that day.
Wow.
So it's a fantastic way to learn a country.
Yes, yeah. And the different areas that you were covering off as well. So now you're in KW, and like you said, now you're working in other areas, environmental, et cetera, but it now gives you an opportunity to be a participant in the community. I like how you put that, rather than as an observer, because I mean, if you're writing for the local paper, you'll bump into somebody at the grocery store, maybe who knows, hey, why did you write about such and such? And it's like, you can really then wonder who's around and but now you're getting involved in creating things. So what were some of the things you were working on community wise?
The first thing I did was start a neighborhood music festival called the Grand Porch Party. So there are a few porch parties now around KW region, but ours was the first one. And it was essentially a way to meet neighbors, to make something new. And I was trying to see what might happen if you used art to bring people together in an unusual way and then layered on an environmental message.
Yeah. I always thought it was brilliant. I loved the porch party concept. And you're living in the uptown area. So you're in the old part of Waterloo, right? The old John Street, William Street, whatever, those areas. And so you're going to have grand porches, right?
Yes.
And large yards,
it's actually
so to
named
speak.
after the river watershed, though.
Okay.
It's named after the Grand River.
Okay. Yes, it does. But it just makes me think. But you realize, though, if you're going to have three people or four people, they can fit on the porch, and present their music, and people can enjoy it. I just think. So, where did that idea come from for you? Like that is just a great idea.
My brother-in-law would come and visit. He's a musician, Michael Reinhardt. And when he visited, he would just practice in our house in Toronto, the apartment that we were renting. So when we moved to Waterloo, we had a little front porch. Ours is not one of the grand ones, I got to say. Okay. Well, it's cute, it's little. And I was just idly wondering, like, next time he visits, I wonder if he'll practice out the front, because that would be really nice for people to just like hear the music. And then I looked around.
Oh, you didn't get mad and say, this noise is driving me nuts, get outside.
So yeah, it just kind of sparked like that. But the first porch party, we held it maybe 8 months after I arrived in Waterloo. Like, it was all within the first year of living here. Yeah.
Because I know now, for example, out here in Ayr, they're doing for the first time a porch fest thing. We don't have a whole lot going on in Ayr,
awesome.
So they're doing something like that out here. So I'm sponsoring it too. I think it's just a great idea to bring music and people together. So it's fantastic. Yeah. So okay, so you're doing the porch fest. What else are you doing within the community?
I was volunteering with Climate Action Waterloo Region. I was sitting on the board of an organisation at the time called My Sustainable Waterloo. My Sustainable Canada, sorry. I was working at an environmental science magazine. So I was the managing editor of that. And that's where like environmental scientists would be sharing their work with the public. So if you know a website called The Conversation, it was similar to that.
Okay.
In print. And then, so that was largely my community staff. That's where it all started. So not long after that, I spent about a year and a bit at the magazine, and then we decided we wanted to have babies, or at least a child or something.
Okay.
Due to some issues, we had to go through IVF.
Okay. Sure. So,
okay. To control my stress level. So then I started freelancing. I was also teaching at Conestoga College. And
oh, my Lord.
In their journalism programs.
Yes.
And freelance writing and freelance editing. So I was busy.
You were absolutely busy. Wow. And so did the porch party and some of that bring you into council, in front of council at times for presentations, or did you have any involvement with council as a citizen going to represent?
Not with the porch party, but Melissa Durrell, who was the councillor at the time.
Yes.
A city event called Open Streets. And that was one of her kind of babies. from council.
Right.
They were looking for new committee members. So she kind of asked me, given that I was getting so involved in the neighbourhood, whether I'd be interested in that committee. So that's really how I started to get involved with council. I co-chaired the Open Streets Committee to help, and that was for 2 years, I think. I was involved in that event.
And Open Streets, was that like King Street in Uptown Waterloo was opened up for a day or a weekend or something like that?
Technically, it meant closing King Street. So we closed it to vehicles, but we opened it to everyone else.
Yes. Open to the people, closed to cars, open to the people.
Yeah, this is before the LRT came through. So you couldn't do it now. You couldn't close it now because of the LRT line. So Open Streets still was happening in Waterloo, but they switched it to Willis Way. So they found other spaces and it closed it to traffic in order to open it up to other opportunities.
They should call it Corduroy Road. So Melissa's, and we've done some podcasts with Melissa and some interesting things that she was working on, like the Allen Street Park and some of the other stuff. So as you're doing Open Streets, then that brings you a little bit more into contact with council and councillors, and were you making observations about what you were seeing at council?
I wasn't a novice at councils. Like, I had reported on councils in
Toronto.
And no, actually, I never had to do council.
Oh, no? Oh, okay.
I was able to duck that one. There was a dedicated staff for that.
Okay.
But, in Australia, I'd covered municipal politics, but I'd also always been interested in politics. I had no intent to go into it. Like, it was not a desire to be a politician. But I've always been hugely interested in politics. I think that's largely why I went into journalism. Like, I was the kid, I remember being 10 years old and staying up late to watch state election results come in and stuff like that.
Right. Okay, yeah. So kindred spirits that way. Yes, I understand what you're saying. So
I remember sitting in at those council meetings in Waterloo, but it was hard to know what was happening when, because a lot of it seemed kind of inside baseball. You had to already know how it worked in order to know how it worked.
Right. Gotcha. So then when you got the tap to run, how did that come about?
Well, actually, so I had started to think about one day maybe running for council. So I thought it would be a wise thing to learn about a campaign. So Melissa was nearing the end of her second term, and I bumped into her on the street, and we knew each other because obviously we were from the neighborhood, from the Porch Party, from Open Streets and the rest.
Yeah.
I said to her, look, if you're looking for people to help with your campaign, I'm looking to learn what campaigns are like. And that's when she said, actually, I'm not looking at running, but you should have a think about it. And, I think that's one of the great things about, you mentioned all of the female politicians in Waterloo, all of the women who hold office. I think it's because we do let each other know, and we do encourage each other, and I encourage men as well. But we have those discussions to say, you're really engaged, you've got skills that could be really useful. Have you thought about it?
Yeah, I think the nice thing about Waterloo is that in 2006, when we were talking to Angela Veith, she mentioned that 2006 was an election that saw half a council was female. We had Brenda Holleran, who broke through. There was her, Karen Coviello, or Skian at the time, and Diane Freeman was there. So that now, people see what they see, and that encourages others when they see, a reflection of themselves in their elected officials. And that's a positive thing for young girls. That would be a positive thing too, to see that women are there and active. And Waterloo is great for that. I was going to say, it's not because everyone has to be a journalist first before they run for that Uptown ward, because Melissa was, the CTV reporter for a while, covering the Waterloo beat before she ran. So it was just coincidental that the two of you went from journalism to journalism. It's sort of like a hand the baton on. So did you, I was going to ask you, did you ever attend the campaign school that is put on?
Yeah. And actually I went because I was also, so after I had my daughters, I was working at the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics, so I kept going with the science writing, but I was also a parenting columnist for the local CBC radio station. And it was for that column that I went to campaign school, because I wanted to find out from people who are parents, what's it like to be a politician and a parent. So I actually went with my columnist hat on rather than as someone who was intended to run. But it was during that day that I was like, oh, maybe I should be thinking of running. And, Melissa's comment was in the back of my mind as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
That was said on the day, and I forget who said it, but they said, if you're waiting for the perfect time to run, it's never going to happen. There will never be a perfect time. So the choice is whether now is good for you or not.
Yes. Well, did you say there were 3 pieces of advice?
No, like that was.
That was the key thing. No, that's a good one. There's never the perfect time. I love that. I think that's
like
so
waiting
true.
for the perfect time to have kids. Ain't going to happen. Just got to jump in.
Yeah, it's like something I heard the other day. It's like in the pursuit of perfection, you'll never get anything accomplished. I think it's a good piece. So the school is actually that has been a phenomenal springboard for a large number of successful female politicians in our community.
Yeah, Jane Mitchell gave the community a great service.
Yeah, when she started that whole process, absolutely. Okay, so tell me about so Melissa's not running. You decide that you're going to run. I know I met you during that campaign in 2018, and I think it was at your house. I think you had an open house or something like that. So I popped by. And what was the campaign like?
It was great, actually. I loved it. I had a wonderful team, a small team. None of us had done anything like it before. One key volunteer, he had worked on one campaign before. That was the most experience any of us had. But it was great. We were kind of working it out as we went. We had really wonderful communication. I was lucky enough to have really fantastic people help me out.
Yes.
And I loved door knocking. I loved talking to people and finding out what was important and talking about, where I came from and I didn't make promises. It wasn't a case of I will go to City Hall and do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
It was if I go to City Hall, these are the things that I will be focusing on. These are the issues of concern. These are the things I'm hoping to sway. Because, a councillor, it's one vote among 8.
Well, that a lot of times people don't realize that until after they're elected and get there. So, but
so
you're right. You're right.
Abject promises, because you can't promise to get anything done because you're one person, but you can promise to try.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. Everyone says, what are you going to do when you get there? And people will say stuff, but a lot of people don't realize it's not like party politics where there's a platform. And so if the government is elected, there's the prime minister or the premier and the elected officials, and you hopefully make some of your platform happen. But like you said, you're one person of 8 or one of, in my case, 16 at the regional council table. So you've got to find compromise and cooperation in order to in cooperation, not only amongst your elected fellows, councillors, but also staff, to work together collaboratively to try to achieve something. Yeah. So what were the sort of themes then that you were running on?
Yeah, so I really wanted to push the climate action. It's the clock is ticking terrifying now.
Yes, yeah.
So it was climate action, equity, largely in terms of trying to make sure that Uptown stayed a place where everyone could live, that it didn't become just an enclave of wealthy people that served only wealthy people.
Yeah.
So those were the main things. And then also just asking good questions, going in there again, I didn't really see myself as a politician. I went in as a community representative.
Yeah.
And people might say same, but there's something in the semantics to me that makes them a bit different.
Most people I talk to don't see themselves as politician because, I'm a lawyer, you're a journalist. That's really what your identity is, or community activist.
I've got lots of hats. You can choose whichever one.
Right. And then suddenly you're elected and now you're the politician. And sometimes, we watch politics and see the career politicians. And we say, well, I'm not that. But you are a politician in a sense. I mean, you have the power to make laws and all that sort of thing. So there is a special sort of situation there. But you're right. I mean, most people are I would say humble and respectful and recognize the importance of the position they have, but don't want to have the airs or anything. Like they want to be approachable. Look at you. I'm still the same person you knew the day before, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a funny situation there. But yeah, I mean, asking questions. I mean, who better than a journalist to be able to ask questions, right? I mean, that's your career.
Yeah, basically. And it's also, I'm not afraid to look dumb. Journalism beats any ego out of you.
Yes.
In a good way. It makes you humble. But also, I wasn't going in there either to make friends. I was going in there to represent the community. So I didn't feel beholden to anyone.
Yeah.
But I also didn't want to be a jerk. So it was like I was going to go in there, be respectful. It's how I roll. And then, and try and have good, decent understandings. But ultimately, it was about the greater good.
Yeah.
The greater good.
I was going to say in the ask questions category, that's a good point too, because sometimes people get in there for the first time and they're worried about asking, quote, stupid questions or, something that's perceived to be silly or what have you. And it's so important for people to recognize that just ask whatever you want to ask, because for the most part, a lot of people will probably have the same sort of questions that you have.
Exactly. Like chances are someone else is wondering the same thing. And there were times at council meetings where I would ask a question that I already knew the answer to it, but I would ask it because I knew that residents would be wondering.
Right,
so it's very important to have those things asked publicly and have the answers publicly available so that people aren't left wondering, how was that decision made? Why didn't they ask about this? It's like, actually, here's like, can you explain X, Y, or Z for the people who are listening? Because most of our council was online.
Yeah, well, this is the new thing now too, right? I mean, 10, 15 years ago, you weren't really online. It was just starting to go online. It was a new thing to be on the YouTube or something. But now everything is online. So you have people watching you in real time. And that's good. It's a good point. Because you're thinking, who's the audience that you want to, and they're saved on, you can go back and watch an old council meeting. Yeah. So who's the audience that you're speaking to? And the more you can educate the general public on issues and not make it so inside baseball, so to speak. Right. That's a good point. I forget that sometimes myself, especially when I'm talking to some of the older politicians who are retired, right? They would have had none of that. They would have had their council meeting. Maybe a few people showed up, maybe the record was there or some other paper, and that's all there was reported. And it wasn't verbatim.
Like viewership is not high. It's not like,
I know
material, but it was very helpful because if people had questions, I could direct them to the video and say, listen to the whole discussion. So it has a good shelf life.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I know we're talking in the tens, not even the hundreds, but it's still a record that's there. So that's a great point. So. On election day, then, was it a close race? Did you have a couple of
There were
people?
5 people who ran.
Oh, 5. Okay.
It was very competitive.
Yes.
Ultimately, there were 2 of us who were kind of the front runners, and I won by a very healthy margin.
Oh, okay, good. Congratulations.
Right, like partway through. And then in 2018, the counting system and the website went down for a while. So we were neck and neck.
Oh.
But then once it came back online, I won by like it was a good margin. Yeah.
After you had stuffed the ballots during that blackout period. That's Russian disinformation, if anybody's listening.
Well, unless there was a ballot at Ethel's.
Hanging chads. But anyway, well, congratulations. So now you're elected. Okay. And as you said, you hadn't been a politician, but you've seen councillors before. But sometimes, there's a bit of a difference from watching somebody ride a bike all the time to actually riding the bike.
Yeah.
So what was the approach that you took out of the blocks then?
just to learn as much as I could, to sit down with staff whenever it was available. The first budget was interesting. I tended to dive deep on things so that I can work out how the process works. So my poor family had a pretty rough first year as well. But I had the good fortune of being on a city council where 4 of us were new. So there was a lot of space and a lot of grace given to us to learn. And staff were fantastic in being very open, happy to answer any questions. And they, like Waterloo City, I haven't seen inside other cities, so it could be like this everywhere. But I felt really, really fortunate because the heads of all of the departments, everyone was so gracious and willing to, and they seemed excited that we wanted to know in depth about their work.
Yeah, and that's important. That's good advice for anyone that's just starting out. Is meet with staff, meet with the heads of the departments. They're very happy to help educate you about what's going on, because sometimes that helps answer a lot of questions in advance. Yeah. And the more you know about how it works, the smoother it is for everybody moving forward, right? So
yes, and I tried very hard to learn the whys and the wheres and everything so that I could hopefully answer a lot of the questions that came to me from constituents. I didn't want to just pass them on to staff. I didn't want to just be this like baton passer. I wanted to know the stuff so that I could explain it. And when I didn't know it and couldn't explain it, then I would bring staff in.
Yeah.
On the flip side, staff also really wanted to know from us on council. Like, we had just come off knocking on thousands of doors. So they were equally curious and keen to connect to find out what were people interested in, what's, you know, they, so it was very much, it wasn't just welcome new council, let us tell you how things are done.
Right.
Let's sit down together. We'll share what's happening at the city, and can you please let us know what's happening in the community? Yeah,
and that's great. And that's very interesting. Yeah, because from the staff perspective, they're not out knocking on the door, so it's a great opportunity for them to find out, what are you hearing? Because you're only like a pollster. You're out there knocking. It's funny too, in a campaign, it's the only time of when some stranger can just come up to your door, knock on it, and have a conversation, and no one thinks twice about it because it's during a campaign. Any other time, you'd be like, who are you? What are you doing here? Get off my grand porch. But anyway, so when did you start to feel like the climate issue was important to you? So how did that for you? Like, this is 2019, because by 2020 comes, we're wham into a pandemic. So I mean, you've got about a year to maybe try to do something, or there was a big bump in the road in 2020.
We got the ball rolling early, so it largely got started very early in the term, because each council puts together its strategic plan.
Yes.
And that's basically the councillors all agreeing what's going to be the focus of the next 4 years.
Yes.
So myself and Jen Vasic, who is the councillor for Ward 5, we made a combined push to make environment and equity the overarching themes of that term. Everything would be either feeding into or informed by climate change and equity needs.
Yes.
Thankfully, council was all on board with that. So, and I feel very fortunate that we had that structure in place when the pandemic hit, because we were already thinking about how can we be creative on the climate change? How can we make sure people aren't being left behind in these discussions? How can we be inclusive? How can we be, because really addressing climate change is all about how are we looking after each other?
Right. At the end of the day. Yeah. How are we all contributing to taking care of one another?
So it's very much a how are we looking after?
Yeah. So before we get into that, I just wanted to step back. Yeah, I just want to step back for a second, because I don't think we've talked about it, even on this podcast, enough, the strategic plan concept, because we're always saying budget is important. Budget talks about what you are as a community, what you're doing for the year, what does it reflect about the community. But the strategic plan is a lens too that is overarching the term of council.
It even overarches the budget.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. Everything you're doing. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, they have to map to the strategic plan. So I think we were very cognizant of that as a council. Like, we dug in really hard into the strategic plan to make sure it was as strong as it could be where we needed it to be. So for me, that was making sure we had environment as a core issue that would be acted upon in this term. It wasn't just something we were talking about as something worth doing. It wasn't a goal, it was an action item.
Right. It's not something you mention and nothing happens with it, because sometimes you bring up ideas but you've got to take the next steps. By having the actual strategic plan in place, that is your guiding principle of how everything you do during the term is seen. The lens through which you see everything is in that strategic plan. No, it's a good point, because sometimes people are like, oh, it's a touchy-feely thing. I don't really want to bother with it. It's it's agony to go through the process, but it's so relevant and important in terms of guiding you.
And it was really heightened for me because my dad was actually dying when we were putting together the strategic plan.
Oh.
So I needed to get back to Australia and to be able to have time with him. But we had this strat plan that we were working on, and I couldn't just...
Right.
I couldn't just leave and not do it. So the city was fantastic. They actually brought forward my participation with certain aspects of the plan so that I could get home and be with my...
Right. Yep.
And then I had to just trust the rest of council to do what was right for the community.
I'm just wondering, in this age of remote contact, like we're doing this through Zoom and stuff like that, was that option there to, like, you could be in Australia and
no.
Yeah, because we always used to say Skype, and then the pandemic hit and Skype got left on the side of the road and Zoom and Teams took over.
That wasn't an option.
Yeah.
For many reasons. Some legal, some due to time differences.
Yeah, understood.
My head would have been in a different place anyway.
Yeah, I understand. So it's great though and it's very sorry about your father's situation and all of that. So my condolences. Then the strategic plan is established, and now you're starting to work on that. So what were some of the things you were able to bring forward vis-a-vis the strategic plan during your term in council?
So probably the big one was we declared a climate emergency. And when we did that, I didn't want it to just be a statement. Again, I'm very action oriented. So the climate emergency also called for the city to create its own climate action plan. There are community climate action plans, but we did one in-house to make sure we were actually doing the work, not just talking about it. So that got put into place. Like that's they already had some good work going on. Don't get me wrong. The city of Waterloo had great buildings programs and they had a lot happening internally.
Right.
But by having this at such a high level, we could make sure the budget, as you mentioned, with the strategic plan and the corporate climate action plan, that would help direct the funding to the places it could have serious impact on. Yeah.
Can you give some examples of what that manifested itself into?
Yeah. So the Waterloo Memorial Rec Complex, people don't know it, it's on Father David Bauer Drive.
Yep.
It's now bigger and shinier than ever before.
Yes, the big addition.
So those additions were already underway. Like the plans were well in process when we started our term, but we approved funding to make sure they could reach the climate goals for that building. So that building is superb in terms of its footprint. It's better than.
Is it like the LEED standards? Is that Oh, okay. Yeah. What other ways did the strategic plan manifest itself?
We established an equity and diversity team. So it led to a staff team of 4, I believe, and then focused on Indigenous representation, accessibility. They're focused on just all these questions that, again, would be at the side of the discussion. We brought them to the middle of the discussion.
And these are permanent positions within the city, like that continues. It's not something that's just for a term of council and then it has to be renewed. Like
this is ongoing. Yeah.
Ongoing. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. So you're having real substantial change and impact.
Yeah. Which is partly why I didn't run again. I went into city council hoping to move the needle on some very specific but very important things.
Yeah.
And we did.
Your causes were noble. Mine was like I wanted to finish building an arena. So that was like
Well, we got to do that too.
So. But yeah, I mean, we'll get to that. The question about running again and all that sort of stuff. The other thing that when you and I were chatting was the transportation master plan. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about that during your time?
Yeah. So that was another big one for our council. So most times, okay, for people who may not be paying huge attention to council, and I know there's a few of you out there, it's okay, no worries. There are these really big overarching documents that get updated maybe every 10 years, maybe every 50, some every 50, it depends on the plan. And so as a councillor, you're not updating all of these things. There might be one or two that come during your time.
Right.
So for us, the transportation master plan was the big piece of city kind of machinations that came through in our time. And it's the overarching plan for how we design, use and connect streets and trails and things like that. Now, I think previously other councils hadn't made such a big deal about the transportation master plans. It was just like, this is how we design roads. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of road focus, sure. Yeah.
But our council came in again with that equity lens, with that lens. And we had heard from residents, it was all across my ward, but it was also all across the city, that people were unhappy with how roads were being used. Like there's just it was all like this. Always people who are upset about speeding, number one issue almost, or top three exactly. Issues when you knock on the door. Yeah. So, and how do you solve that? Largely through road design, because councils can't tell the police what to do. That's another thing people didn't realize. They would ask us to have the police come. Yeah. Oh yeah. Hey, just go on down. And, we can't. For good reason. Politicians can't tell the police what to do. Right. But we can let them know about problem areas. So that's the discussion I would have with the police. Yeah. I also encourage people, if they may not know it, but WRPS, like the Waterloo Region Police Service, has an online reporting tool where you can flag problem locations. If there's a stop sign, people are always running, or if you see someone run. But they have limited resources too for speed enforcement anyway. I mean, there's so many things that they have to do in the community with human trafficking, drugs, break-in and enters, assaults, murder investigations, and speeding. So I mean, there's just too many. It's not small beans though, because it's not. But it's like time consuming. You pull somebody over, et cetera, right? So that's why we need more speed cameras. There you go. Well, I was just thinking, not more speed cameras, more 30 and 40 kilometer zones, right? Because that'll at least get a lot of people thinking and slowing down. Not everybody, but at least I think it changes habits. It does. And there's research that supports that, actually. Yeah, for sure. We have 30-kilometer neighborhoods. The average speed drops, and it drops beyond that neighborhood too. Yeah. The research shows it probably won't drop to 30. But to be honest, we have roads that are 40 or 50 and people speed there too. Yeah. So the transportation master plan, because I know the speeding, the speed limit was a big issue. And I know, so Royce Bodley I remember seeing the video he posted where he actually tested some roads at 30 and 40 and what the difference in the time was, which was pretty insignificant as well. So that would have been part of this, right? The transportation master plan? It was, but it wasn't a big part. No. But I'm just saying it was a part. That's all. I mean, some things get more attention than others, though, whether there's big or small. But the master plan, it was talking about reducing road speeds just on the city roads, not on regional roads. Yeah, right. So it's mostly neighborhood roads. Talked about redesigning when a road does get rebuilt, because normally it's the infrastructure under the road that determines when a road needs to be rebuilt. Right. But when that time comes, the master plan outlines how it should be rebuilt. And as the city, we have adopted Vision Zero guidelines, which aims to make streets just safer as an environment. And that involves designing the streets so that it feels like you shouldn't drive so fast there. So it's like having a road that's super wide versus one that's been narrowed at the intersections so that it visually cues you to slow.
Yeah, and Vision Zero is trying to reduce accidents to zero as a goal, a noble goal. But but it's in the right direction for sure.
Well, and also the master plan had things like, how do we measure if a road is functioning well? So our council actually we inserted a lot of different stuff into this plan, and one of it was, let's not just count the cars. Let's also look at how it's functioning for people who are walking, people who are biking, people who are using wheelchairs.
Yeah.
Let's assess it through a multimodal lens, not just
Yeah, and that would be a shift in thinking over time for sure. Now you could add e-scooters and e-bikes.
I do like how the e-scooters say, "Don't use me on a sidewalk." That's very good.
Yes. I know. Anyway, I'm more hesitant on e-scooters just because of the potential danger and injury aspect. I love e-bikes. I have my wife and I have e-bikes, so they're great to get around. I think they're super. But okay. So anything else on the transportation master plan you wanted to touch on?
No, that was great. Like I'm also like, there was a lot of focus on improving cycling throughout the city.
Yes.
But I always approach that as cycling infrastructure is also a benefit to pedestrians. So pedestrian experience is also very high in my mind. So I was it's difficult trying to walk those many lines because buses still need to get around, delivery vehicles still need to get around.
I know. Yeah.
Or bike. Like there will always be people who need their cars as well, like for accessibility reasons. So it was an interesting juggle. But I think
I know what you mean. So when you say bike lanes because then bikes aren't on the sidewalks, right? I mean, that's And look, if it's if you feel unsafe on a road, you got to go on the sidewalk. I mean, what can you do? It's a difficult situation because a pedestrian or a bike car accident, there's one clear loser in that situation. And certainly if you're on the sidewalk as a bicyclist, and sometimes I'll pop on the sidewalk just to feel a little safer, but I'm always very cautious about any driveways or coming to another intersection and slowing right down to make sure that anyone's around, there's eye contact, or, share the road, share the sidewalk. Yeah. But the infrastructure is always interesting on bicycles, like, connected and protected. Anything you can do to improve that aspect of it. You had some expansion of bike lanes during your term, right? I mean,
So one of the ones that I love is there's now a protected bike lane on Erb Street for part of Erb as it runs through the core. And as someone who lives on the west side of King Street, so I'm in the Uptown West neighborhood. Yeah. It actually has provided a crucial east-west corridor to get to the other side of King, because it's actually difficult to get there on a bike. If you're not, I'm comfortable in traffic. Like I'm a very adept cyclist. I don't mind being in cars. Yeah. If you're not comfortable in car, like, telling cars to bugger off if they're getting in the way. If you're not comfortable doing that, you need somewhere. So having that protected lane has been fantastic. But the city also, there's been a trail extension out to St. Jacobs. We have new cycling lanes. There's new cycling lanes on the regional roads uptown. I think what Kitchener has done in its downtown is fantastic. And I think we're just trying to kind of keep the ball rolling here as well. Yeah.
I just block out the naysayers. Oh, I haven't seen a bike on that road for a week or whatever kind of thing, or in that lane for a week. Right.
I just feel like saying, have you noticed how often the entire road has no cars on it?
Right. Exactly. So once we get a better infrastructure and connectivity, it will draw, and the more intensification we have, it provides more options for people. So
and I just look at the core, like the more residents of the core that are able to buy, that frees that makes road room for the people who don't live in the core and do have to drive.
Exactly.
My approach was to think of it in concentric circles. So Ward 7, which is my ward, and Ward 6 have the highest uptake of cyclists, the highest proportion of cyclists, and that makes sense because we can easily bike 2 or 3 kilometers to run errands.
Yes.
And that means we're not on the roads, which makes it better for other drivers who are.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. It's interesting because you have that. I mean, Uptown Waterloo, just to access all the different shops and services and everything is just, I mean, if one was to rent a condo or buy a condo somewhere, I think the Uptown area is just a wonderful place in terms of all the options and everything that's available there. It's really something. So now, we've got a pandemic that hits. And I mean, for you're just 1 year quote politician, and now the pandemic hits. Tell me what that was like.
So we were really just finding our feet, I think, the new councillors.
Yeah.
So we were kind of starting to hit our stride. We'd worked out how council works, working out how the city works. And then everything, I mean, anyone listening to this was probably there, it's like
right.
Everything went to the wall. Now, as I said before, I've got twins, and they were in grade 1. I was working part-time at Perimeter Institute as a science writer. I was doing council part-time, and I had, grade 1 kids. So life was already very busy. It suddenly struck me that our house was kind of, our home life, it felt like a house of cards that just fell. So personally, I ended up leaving my day job. I couldn't do everything. My kids needed me. So I brought it back to just council and just my kids, like just my family.
Yeah.
The pandemic was, as a councillor, it was pretty insane. Like it was a lot. It was a lot. Partly because we didn't know what was happening. We didn't have much more information than the public. And for a city councillor, there was even less information because public health is regional. So we were trying really hard to, as a region, be cohesive. We didn't want to have different rules in Waterloo than Kitchener so that people could pick and choose whether to wear a mask or not, that kind of stuff.
Right.
All in and then hold that line.
That's a good piece of information because of our 2-tier, right? And you could end up with different situations. So sort of like speed limits were different for a little while in the 2 cities, but you're right. I mean, that's so important, especially with the pandemic. Continue on, please.
So we were having weekly meetings about this as a council. There would be updates. The staff were working tremendously hard on a lot of this. So we would get updates. There were things that we could speak to the public about. There were things that we couldn't. It just goes with public office. There's not always stuff that you can share, but we were always very clear about, okay, we would ask, can we tell people X, Y, and there was, and almost always the answer was yes. Like there wasn't much that wasn't able to be shared. It was really hard though, because, the federal government, every level of government was struggling to work out what to do. So early on, the playgrounds were closed.
Yes.
People thought it was passed through contact.
Right. Yeah. Surface contact. Yeah.
It was so hard for the kids, and I got it because I was in exactly the same boat as all the other parents. So trying to, it was a juggling act really to be wearing both hats. But I understand science. I understand the scientific process.
Yes.
Science is always the best that we know with the information we have. And as we got more information about COVID, the advice changed because it became, this is now the best advice because we have more information.
Yeah. I mean, we have to be flexible with the unknown as more becomes known, right? I mean, I hear you.
I tried to communicate that with my residents as much as I could. When there was a change, I would explain as best as I could why there was a change, what new information had fed into it. But I think also there were people who just wanted certainty, and they saw the changing advice as something of a betrayal. And that was hard. So I was always trying very much to come from a place of sharing the information that we had and making sure it was legitimate information.
Well, this is the thing in the social media age, right? We're all within our own media bubble, getting information from sources that we've selected that we want to follow because there is something that aligns with some way of thinking, and then you're influenced and not able to check the information, fact check the information that well, results in problems.
There's research as well that shows that if you come across information that goes against your beliefs, most people will just dig in more deeply to their beliefs.
Right. Oh, okay. Yes. Okay.
On the slope of the anti-vax, anti-science stuff, presenting the accurate information would often backfire. So
it's almost a no-win situation. You want to present it because you want to clarify, but if you don't present it, then it just perpetuates.
Yeah. And I think one of the hard things too is like people I understood why people were frustrated. I understood why people wanted certainty, but I couldn't countenance the descent into just informational madness, really. I couldn't really understand or grasp that.
Right. Did you feel that just back to the municipal aspect, like our region, did you feel the two-tier was a hindrance, or we were able to overcome and work collaboratively despite having the two-tier?
No, I think it worked fabulously. Just with the two-tier, like if there are constraints or whatever, I'm neither for nor against amalgamation. I'm just like, but it's.
Yeah, this wasn't a question. I wasn't leading to that with this question. I was just wondering, just procedurally, how things worked. That's all.
Yeah. I think procedurally it worked very, very smoothly because we knew we were all in it together.
Yeah.
And in some ways it was helpful as a city councillor because I wasn't involved. I wasn't involved in policy at all. So I could just kind of punt people over to the regional councillors a bit. So it gave me more capacity to just focus on what the city could do. Because, people think, politicians have lots of money, lots of power. And I'm just like, nah. If you want either of those, do not go into city council. It is not for politics.
Well, maybe if you're a senator in the States, they seem to do quite well after they're all done.
Because there's a fairly limited sandbox that we're in.
Yeah.
So my focus was able to be, what can we do for the community with the tools that we have? So I was working very closely. Like I sat on, as a councillor, I was on the board of the Uptown BIA, the business improvement.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how was that working with the local businesses in Waterloo?
Yeah, so that was, they were doing it so tough. They were, and the rules kept changing. The people who run the BIA were amazing. They did such a good job of keeping businesses up to date and informed. So big shout out to Tracy and the team. They were phenomenal. As a councillor, I tried really hard to help smooth any issues between businesses and the city. So what we did, the economic development team at the city very quickly came up with some options for how we could make things easier for businesses. And it was things like, let's let them use the sidewalk.
Right.
Let's make patios permitted on parking lots. If maybe we can make city property available for pop-up markets and things like that. So It's funny, all these things that in the past might have been too hard or would have taken a while to put together.
Too much red tape.
Very quickly it was like, boom.
Yeah.
So
that's a positive. Now I got to ask you though, because we can't do the podcast without asking about the photo. So the iconic photo, the salute that you gave to the rally. Tell us about that.
Okay, well, look, it just wasn't my classiest moment, I got to say, and it was a number of things behind it. The abject anti-science-ness of it, the fact that a federal politician was exploiting this for really divisive reasons. Personally, I recently lost my sister-in-law because her cancer wasn't caught in time because of pandemic restrictions.
Right.
There was a lot. There were many, many, many layers, and I think I was just frustrated.
Yeah, you represented what many were feeling. Like we just had it with all of that going on, and there was a release right there.
Yeah, it was. I did get a lot of thanks very quietly from people right across the city, actually. But there were understandably people who were not thankful and not impressed.
Oh,
and
sure.
It wasn't, as I said, not my classiest moment.
Well, you know what? Just like you said earlier, we talked about if you're going to pursue the perfect, then nothing's going to happen. Yeah. Right.
So I think, side note, I had a few Aussies reach out and say, what was the big deal? So I think there may have been a little bit of cultural dissonance because it's slightly less offensive in Australia.
Okay, we'll go with that. So I'll just say she's Australian. Well, listen, Tenille, I just want to end on that. I know you didn't run again, obviously, for a whole lot of reasons. A lot of it, one, you accomplish what you want to accomplish, and it's good on you to say, okay, I've done what I wanted to do, and I'm going to move on to other things, something like that, correct?
That's part of it. I also wanted to show people that you don't have to do it forever.
Right on.
You can work hard, you can do it at a sprint, and then you can finish when you're ready. Also,
I'm in your camp. That's what I'm in the camp. I'm the same.
Yeah, but another big reason was, climate action really is still my driving focus. And I was able to work to put the mechanisms in place. This term of council is going to be making sure that actually happens. And I think a different skill set was needed.
Yeah. Well, now you can still be on that issue, but from the outside without any burdens of office and be that, free bird to free spirit to say, this is what we have to do and fight and advocate on that one issue without dealing with all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Tenille, thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciated the time and for making yourself available. And I wish you all the best and on all your future adventures and endeavors.
Thank you. I will be watching from the gallery, eating my popcorn.
Okay. Take care, Tenille. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Old Grey Mares podcast. If you have any ideas for stories or people you would like us to interview or reach out to, please feel free to contact us. And thank you again.